Um, Welcome to the farm, I guess. Since we're reviewing Animal Farm, this is a little bit intimidating if you know anything about the book. Not sure if we should stay here for long. I'm not sure how dangerous this simulation is. I might be a bit close to you when I tell you about the book, just because I don't know how much the animals can actually understand. If they can understand what I'm saying, I don't know what they'll do to us. Anyway, our assignment here is to do a book review of Animal Farm. Okay, well, Animal Farm, as you know, is allegorical. It's a metaphor. Kind of obviously. Animals don't speak or create communist, tyrannical dictatorships, as far as I know. But just to be safe, let's keep this between you and me. If you've read Animal Farm, you'll notice that it's not tiny. It's not tiny, but it's fairly short compared to a normal story, and it's what some people call a novella, which basically means medium story, I guess. Comes from novella in Italian, meaning new, but it's a literary genre which is kind of like bigger than a short story, but smaller than a novel, I guess. I'm not sure how much historical context I need to give, seeing as the historical context is not really what's necessary about the book to understand now. You can understand why Orwell was writing, but the implications, the profound kind of splitting, very fierce implications on human behaviour and government are still applicable, and that's probably why the book is still popular. But to analyse that, I guess some understanding of history is needed. If you know Animal Farm, then you know 1984. And if you know 1984, then you'll understand the context for Animal Farm. Orwell, Eric Arthur Blair, was writing about regimes in general, government in general, but particularly he was most interested in the Russian Revolution, I think it was 1917, up to the Stalinist era. And I think he wrote this book in 1945. And he was kind of deeply offended about the hypocrisy and the weird behaviour of the government and how it transformed from the early days of the kind of communistic, social revolution to just the Soviet Union and Stalin's era. Since he was a democratic socialist, he still believed in having a government that wasn't all out, full on. He still wanted democracy. He still wanted autonomy. He still wanted free will. But he believed in a kind of a little bit of a utopian, just society. And so that's what he writes about in both books. Animal Farm is very heavy satire, a lot of the time to a point of being actually comedic level satire. Animal Farm covers the beginning of the revolution, and revolutions in general. That's why it's still applicable, because it talks about the nature of human behaviour, of government, hypocrisy, of greed. And then later on, 1984 is kind of like, what's the worst possible outcome of the revolution of Animal Farm? it's 1984, and that's what the point of 1984 is. But the ideas of government and control and ideology and kind of utopian ideas are both central themes in both books. One of the things which I think makes Orwell so extremely popular and still relevant is how easy it is to spot the satire. It's kind of like an entry, it's a gateway to understanding political satire because it's so upfront. It's so easy to see, to understand what he's trying to say. I mean, Animal Farm, the animals are literally anthropomorphized into characters from the Russian Revolution, or they literally represent what the animals kind of have represented throughout human history. The sheep following the leader, having a shepherd. The sheep are kind of people, kind of repeating the slogans, falling for the ideology but not understanding it. But there's that. The pigs, I mean, that represents greed. They're at the top. No matter if it's in a communist or a capitalist system, the people that kind of weaseled their way to the top are the pigs. And you can see this through another metaphor in 1984, when Orwell writes about the beetle-like men who scuttle their way through the ministry of truth. It's this very potent illustration that really, really makes you kind of gutturally hate the system. It's very much how Marx wrote in the Communist Manifesto. It's these powerful illustrations of the strata of human existence that makes 1984 and Animal Farm so profound and probably lasting throughout a long time in our literary history, from now and to come in the future. It's going to be studied for, I bet a long time. It's a very good introduction into political satire, because you have to be kind of in a very small percentage of people to cover read Animal Farm and not see how it's a metaphor, not see the commentary that he's making on human behaviour. When I thought about Animal Farm in the past, and when I wrote an essay on it for high school, my point was not that the animals were being anthropomorphized. The behaviours of the animals were being like humans, but I can't think of a word for it, but I think that the humans were being more morphized into animals, kind of the opposite. He started with the events and the people and then turned them into the animals. He started with Stalin and then turned him into Napoleon. Napoleon is the main kind of evil pig in the text. Another reason that I gather that this text is kind of transcendental between circumstance is that the specific points don't really matter. What his points about government, about how, specifics of government should be enacted and given, it doesn't really matter in the long run. But the things which are central to the books are themes which are always extant throughout human history, things that are lasting because they're imbued both in systems of how we understand and view the world, but also deep within our psychology and psychiatry. He comments on what power does, what kind of people are attracted to power, What is greed? What is truth? What is external reality? How do some people use their place and their influence to persuade, to manipulate, to create some sort of rhetoric, propaganda to control their audience? And it's very interesting noting how Orwell writes in his books, because Orwell's writing is fundamentally extreme propaganda. He is very against what he talks about. The illustrations that he depicts of Animal Farm and in 1984 are extremely dim. They're extremely gloomy. They really, really, really shut down the idea of revolutions, and they really depict the human race through the animals as only having a very small percentage of people who are aware of what is going on, and those people are always at high risk. They get hunted out, they die early, and then the rest of the people are either too much of cowards or are unaware of what's going on and will continue to follow the government in whatever they do. Orwell's writing has this almost biblical fundamental commentary on human behaviour. It's that kind of tricky, serpent-like people who control and who manipulate, who don't reveal the full truth. It's kind of like the serpent in the Garden of Eden. But a bit further than that, it doesn't only talk about behaviour, but ideas and behaviour and ideology. Idea of devoting oneself to something bigger, to something larger, to devoting oneself to an idea or to a purpose, to a utopia. This is fundamentally biblical as well as one of the core ideas of religion is, kind of a devotion to something larger than oneself. But this is kind of like the mirroring of religious and fundamental thought on the reverse on a human behaviour. Orwell, in that way, is kind of a little bit Jungian, is a little bit writing about archetypes, and it's quite interesting to note how similar a lot of what Orwell's writing is to what he writes about. Finally, I think one of the really important commentaries that Orwell writes about is the power of intellectual ideology and blindness. You'll notice that some of the most passionate and eager people in Orwell's text and Animal Farm are those who are actually highly educated, and they've kind of educated themselves into a sort of blindness, but for one or another reason they lack the nobility to be able to conclude the real truth. Squealer, for example. There is something inherently selfish about Squealer, yet he was very highly educated in the art of rhetoric and oratory. And this goes the same for the character Syme in 1984. His belief in the art of newspeak was too much, and thus he endangered himself both from the government and from seeing the real truth. But what I think is a fundamental takeaway from both texts is that you can find truth, but it may risk you a lot. In both texts, evil did actually win. But it depends what you mean by win. If you mean win in the heart of the characters, then possibly not. But if you mean win in terms of control of external reality, then yes. In both Animal Farm and 1984, the prevailing power was that of one who was against truth, the ultimate fake news. But Orwell really pushes that if you want to seek for truth, if you want to know what's real, then you have to be willing to risk everything. In Animal Farm, you have to be willing to risk your life. And in 1984, you have to be willing to risk your soul and your life. And this is an extremely grim takeaway, and that's the divisive rhetorical power that Orwell has as a writer. These books can kind of leave you with a bit of a sour taste in your mouth. But that being said, they are still important, but no author in themselves is likely to be completely right about everything or be able to view the entirety of history, so circumstances may change. The attributes that he describes may stay the same, but I don't see any necessary reason to completely take hold of the doom and gloom of Orwell's writings. But if there is anything that you need to take away, it's that the truth is important, but it comes at a very large sacrifice. I hope you enjoyed studying Animal Farm with me. I had a great time reading it. It was very interesting. Alright, let's get off this farm before the animals have another revolution.